This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're on a 100-city silent majority election 2012 tour, and today we're broadcasting from Colorado Springs, the second largest city in Colorado. In and around the city, you'll find four major military installations: Fort Carson, Peterson Air Force Base, the United States Air Force Academy, and Schriever Air Force Base, and the Cheyenne Mountain Air Station. This weekend marks the 11th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. The invasion began on October 7, 2001, less than a month after the September 11th attacks. The war has gone on for more than 4,000 days, making it the longest war in U.S. history. At least 2,000 U.S. soldiers have died in the war. The death toll in Afghanistan is unknown. Today, we'll take a look at the invisible wounds of war here at home. Some 2.4 million soldiers have been through Iraq and Afghanistan, and the psychological toll of the wars is mounting. Last year, the Veterans Administration, or VA, treated almost 100,000 Iraq and Afghanistan veterans for PTSD. But many agree the numbers could be much higher because not everyone who suffers seeks treatment. Here in Colorado Springs, the commanders at Fort Carson have come under scrutiny for its handling of mental health concerns, with a 2010 joint NPR-ProPublica investigation finding as many as 40% of Fort Carson soldiers had mild brain injuries missed by Army health screenings. Meanwhile, in 2009, the Colorado Springs Gazette published a startling series called Casualties of War. It examined a part of war seldom discussed by the media or government officials: the difficulty of returning to civilian life after being trained to be a killer. The story focused on a single battalion based at Fort Carson here in Colorado Springs, the 2nd Battalion, 12th Infantry Regiment. The battalion's nickname is the Lethal Warriors. In Iraq, the unit fought in some of the war's bloodiest battles. For some of the unit soldiers, the killing did not end when they returned home. The Gazette reported since 2006, 10 infantry soldiers have been arrested and accused of murder, attempted murder, or manslaughter. Others have committed other violent crimes. Some of the veterans have committed suicide. In a one-year period, from the fall of 2007 to the fall of 2008, the murder rate for members of the Army unit was 114 times the rate for Colorado Springs. The series was written by investigative reporter Dave Phillips. He turned his reporting into the book Lethal Warriors when the new band of brothers came home. David Phillips joins us here in Colorado Springs. Also with us in Colorado Springs is Georg-Andreas Pogany. He's an independent veterans advocate and investigator. He's a retired sergeant, first class from the United States Army. We are also joined by Graham Clumpner, Afghanistan War vet, Colorado regional organizer for IVA, Iraq Veterans Against the War. And we welcome you all to Democracy Now! Thank you. And thanks so much, both to Andrew and Graham, for coming in from Denver. It's snowing.
It was snowing on the way down.
Yes. The first snow of the season. Graham, you're a veteran of the Afghanistan War. Tomorrow marks the 11th anniversary of this war. Your thoughts today?
Well, when we look back, 11 years ago Sunday at 11 a.m. Central Time, which is Colorado time, President Bush came on television and announced to the nation that we'd begun bombing the people of Afghanistan. And 11 years later, we have a lineage that has extended longer than any other war, and we're looking at a situation where we have so many millions of soldiers coming home to communities like Colorado Springs, and not being able to separate the trauma that they experience in those combat zones and outside of those combat zones, just by nature of being in the military. Because participating in this militaristic system, whether you deploy or don't deploy, is a traumatic experience. And people bring those traumas back to our communities. And what we're struggling with now is finding a way for these people, these soldiers, sailors, airmen, infantry, all of the members of the armed forces, to come back and reintegrate into their communities.
You're organizing this weekend. You're part of a group of soldiers and vets who've come together in Denver. Explain what's happening.
In 2004, Iraq Veterans Against the War was founded by the first returning soldiers from the Iraq War. And since then, we have expanded to include any soldier or veteran who has served post 9/11 in the global war on terror. Our organization has been prioritizing Afghanistan veterans recently, not only because we have the most problems coming out of Afghanistan, out of the 6 countries that we're currently bombing, but also because Afghanistan veterans can speak to a larger concern, which is it's very easy for the American people, and in fact some cases the world, to lose sight of and stop paying attention to these conflicts. And as we sit here today, there are soldiers and there are civilians sitting in firefights and sitting in situations where their lives are at risk, and we don't take a lot of time to look at that other than looking at the numbers on the front page of the newspaper that say 4 dead or 7 dead. And it doesn't mean anything to us. So this weekend we're having Iraq Veterans Against the War's first Afghanistan retreat. We're bringing Afghanistan members from all over the country here to Colorado. We're going to be meeting in Denver, and we're going to be discussing what kind of things we've been successful at in the past and where we failed, and then where we need to go in the future. Looking at organizing models that span the spectrum from the coalition of the Immokalee workers to the civil rights campaigns in the 50s, 60s, and 70s to the environmental movement. And we're taking those lessons and moving forward as we look at a larger path of militarism. Because this isn't just about Afghanistan. It's not just about Syria or Libya or Somalia or Iraq. We're talking about Iran. We're talking about the future. And we're asking ourselves, how do we feel safer when we are involved in more bases and more countries than we've ever been in our history?
Dave Phillips, place us here today, here in Colorado Springs. For people around the country who don't understand this city at the foot of the Rockies, talk about its military significance for the country.
Well, in a lot of ways, Colorado Springs is an average town in terms of demographics, in terms of crime rates, just about anything you could look at in the census. The big difference is that by far our largest industry, if you want to call it that, is the Department of Defense. How many active duty do we have here in Colorado Springs? Over 50,000, I believe. And so that really is the lifeblood of our town.
This investigation that you did, the unit called Lethal Warriors, share with us what it is that you found as you worked for the Gazette, nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, your investigation.
It started with us just seeing a lot of soldiers getting arrested for murder. And we didn't know until we really started digging that it wasn't the entire 30,000 soldiers at Fort Carson that were really responsible. It was just one group of 500 guys. At that point, we said, my God, how can you have so much violence coming out of one small group? It must have to do with their collective story of their experience. And so we started tracing that story by going to the prison, talking to the guys who were in there, finding their friends, talking to them. And what we found out, essentially, is that these guys had been in the very worst places in Iraq, had been through things that most people, even people who are familiar with the war, would find unspeakable. When they came back to a system that had been prepared for an Iraq war that the administration thought would last 6 months, and was not prepared to really deal with any psychological casualties. And so the army that they had served, when they started showing these psychological wounds from war, a lot of times instead of helping them, it punished them. It kicked them out. When that happens and these guys no longer have any help, a lot of times they just spiraled into a very dark place, and it ended in violence.
I mean, here at Fort Carson, the murder rate, 114 times the murder rate in Colorado Springs, in civilian Colorado Springs? For
that battalion that we looked at, which is amazing. Now, you have to remember that a combat battalion is almost all young men, but even when we correct for demographics, it's something like 20 times as high. Twice as high would have been amazingly significant. This was off the charts. The funny thing is, when we called Fort Carson to ask about this, a lot of times the official response was, we don't know what the problem is that you're talking about. You know, it's unfair for you to try and paint our brave warfighters as criminals. There was a reluctancy to pick apart the problem and try and solve it.
We're going to talk more about this as we, after break. We're joined by Dave Phillips, who wrote a remarkable book called Lethal Warrior. We're going to be speaking with Andrew Pogany, who is a veteran from Iraq, and Graham Clumpner with us as well, a veteran of the Afghanistan War. They have gathered in Denver for this gathering, the first Afghanistan retreat of Iraq veterans against the war. We'll continue this discussion as we broadcast from the Tim Gill Center for Public Media in Colorado Springs. It was just inaugurated last week. It is an honor to be here with the first broadcast, not to mention the first global broadcast in this center's history. Stay with us.